My name is Taylor Pearson. I am the author of The End of Jobs. I wanted to put together a little presentation here. I've delivered this a couple times on a webinar into some live audiences, and kind of wanted to have something to share or pass around that would give a more condensed version of the primary concepts in the book, and also elaborate on them in a little different ways than I did in the book necessarily. So my contact information is at the bottom. I'd love to hear from anyone. If you have any thoughts, questions on the book, presentation, etc. So the book is The End of Jobs, Money, Meaning, and Freedom Without the 9 to 5. And kind of the crux of the book is what's going on in this chart here. So since 2000, population has grown much faster than jobs. If you look at the last half of the 20th century, 1948 to 2000, this wasn't the case. That jobs were growing faster than population, and there was this abundance of job opportunities. And that hasn't been the case for the first half of the 21st century. And I think a lot of people feel this intuitively if they haven't seen this statistic before, that there certainly seem to be less opportunities now than there were previously. This was something very much, I didn't know the statistics, but I felt, this image up here on the left is me after college, and I didn't really like the job opportunities in front of me. And so 4 years later, this picture on the right was taken. It's at a conference in Bangkok in October of 2014 with a group of entrepreneurs. And what had happened over those past 5 years was I had spent a lot of time working around entrepreneurs, and had gone from this position where I felt like opportunities were limited, jobs were limited, to a position where opportunities were abundant, resources where opportunities were abundant, and there seemed to be a lot more possibilities. So I want to talk about what the transition was, what was the change in mindset and the change in perspective that happened there. So kind of what I was doing over those few years. One, I was talking with a lot of entrepreneurs. This map in the upper right is from that the group, the Dynamite Circle, which is the one that hosted that conference. These are the members. They're all over the world, running businesses, working in entrepreneurial positions. And then this is me on the left with the gentleman who I worked with. We helped manage some e-commerce companies for a couple of years, and stepped into kind of this more entrepreneurial role. So I'm going to talk about that story, and also interviews with entrepreneurs, and how they made that transition, why they made that transition, and what that kind of looks like. So this is the thesis of the book. We'll start off with the denouement and then work backwards. So jobs are getting more competitive and less profitable, while entrepreneurship is more accessible, safer, and profitable than ever. Now, why is this, and are we really at the end of jobs? I think we are, and I think there's kind of two primary reasons. We can say we're at the end of jobs. We're reaching this point where we've crossed peak jobs, so to speak, that the growth in jobs relative to population is not something that's going to come back. I think one of the primary reasons is globalization and outsourcing. These are some pictures taken from a market in downtown Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And I think this is the image. This is certainly the image I had of much of the developing world. There's kind of this street commerce, people selling shops and selling people selling from like their little street stalls, and we don't think of it as accurately as it might be today. So it looks a lot more like this. It looks like three children sitting at computers. I was at an event in Ho Chi Minh City a couple years ago, and there was a group of students. They were computer programmers, and their grandparents had grown up as rice farmers. This transition that took the West hundreds and hundreds of years is being compressed into the period of a few generations in much of the developing world. That going from agricultural to industrial to the knowledge economy is something that took the West, say, 700 years, and it's something that's happened in much of the developing world in certainly the past century, and even more so in the past 10 or 20 years. So we've gone from this position where Up until 2000, there were 90 million graduates globally, college graduates globally. In 2010, there were 130 million. So it took all of human history to get to 90 million, and then only 10 more years to almost add 50%, to add 40 million to that 90 million. So we've seen this massive acceleration in college-educated individuals that are capable of stepping into, even knowledge jobs that can be done over the computer, over an internet connection. And it's also much easier to access those people. So, look at 10 or 20 years ago, there wasn't voice over IP, or 10 years ago, voice over IP like Skype was in its very, very early stages. And today that's very developed. If you're trying to hire or you're trying to manage someone overseas or even make a phone call, you used to have to walk into your phone booth and scratch off the ticket. And we were paying 5 minutes a call, and now you're sitting in a cafe with Wi-Fi and your Skype connection open, and you can make kind of these high quality voice calls for free. So much larger market that traditional jobs are competing with, and also much easier to access that market, whether that's through tools like Skype or platforms like Upwork, which was formerly known as Odesk, freelancer.com, all these kinds of platforms. So the other thing, this is one of my favorite charts. I like to chart it a lot, and it's, if you see here on the left, this is global GDP, global income per person, over basically the last 2,000 years. So up until about 1800, we were in this period of the Malthusian trap. And then around 1800, humanity basically invented wealth creation, which is previously wealth had kind of gone up and down and up and down, but there had never been a consistent ability to increase income per person or the amount of wealth available globally. And that changed around the time we developed capitalism as a system and the Industrial Revolution. So if you look here, the graph on the right, you see this kind of zoomed in version starting at 1800 where the graph starts to pick up. And we see growth rates of 1 to 2.5% over the past 200 years. So this kind of consistent growth in the economy over the past 200 years has led to per capita GDP globally being higher than it's ever been before, at least on this global time scale, much higher than hundreds of years ago. And that is kind of the previous view. And I think when you look at certain sectors of the economy, technology-enabled sectors, that growth rate is much, much faster. So we're used to this 1, 2, maybe 3% annual growth, and the rate at which technology is moving, governed by Moore's Law, which basically says that processing power doubles and cost halves roughly every 18 to 24 months. So going from this 1 to 2% linear growth to potentially exponential growth. So we see growth rates as high as 30, 40% in these sectors. So if you look at, again, this would be the idea that the small sloping line is this gradual increase we've seen over the past 200 years, and we could be standing at this point where that growth rate is going to accelerate dramatically. And what the implications of that are is that technology is going to be transforming industries. You look at Blockbuster had 60,000 employees. Netflix has around 2,000 and is able to access and serve a larger market and more people. So you've gone from 60,000 to 2,000, and Netflix is probably reaching more people than Blockbuster was in its heyday. So these massive gains in efficiency requiring much fewer traditional jobs to do. So why is this? Why do we not see what's going on? Or why is this hard to understand? Why are many people resistant to understanding it? And I think a big part of that reason is that we are linear creatures living in an exponential world. So kind of the mental model we have as humans are based on our traditional human biases, and we tend to see change as something that is gradual when we're living in a world where change is happening much, much faster. So AT&T commissioned McKinsey & Company to do a study in the early 1980s predicting how many cell phone users there would be in the year 2000. So McKinsey went out, they looked at this cell phone from 1983, and they said, well, how many people were carrying around these things in 20 years? And they estimated there were going to be 900,000 cell phone users in the year 2000. Of course, cell phones looked much different in 2000, and there were actually 100 million users. So they were off by an order of magnitude. They were off by, 99 million people. That the answer was 120 times more than they guessed. The same story kind of holds true with the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project was started as a way to sequence the human genome. It took 7 years to get the first % of the genome sequenced, and you had all the scientists come in and they had a meeting about this and said, this is an absurd thing to do. At this rate, it's going to take us a century at best to get the genome sequenced. And they had the entire project finished in the next 8 years. So it took 15 years total, took 7 years to get the first 1%, and 8 years to get the remaining 99% because of, these improvements in technology. So these are, a very well-respected management firm, and quite literally some of the most esteemed, most intelligent scientists on Earth who could not kind of wrap their brains around this exponential or certainly very, very fast rate at which technology is affecting things. And so while this is kind of confined to small sectors of the economy at this point, I think we're starting to see this is going to kind of bleed over into the economy at large. And these like efficiencies and changes in the labor market we've seen with like Blockbuster and Netflix are not going to be anomalies, but are going to very much be the new normal. So while I was writing the book, I read this story in the New York Times. This girl's name is Megan. She is or at the time was a receptionist at a law firm in Atlanta, Georgia. She was earning, I think, $37,000 a year, and she had over $100,000 in student debt. And she was, at the time, I think, happy to kind of be able to move into this position. She'd previously been working, I think, as like a waitress in the service sector, and had eventually, been able to get this job clerking and kind of being an administrative assistant at a law office. And what the article pointed out was kind of this other trend. So we've got globalization, we've got technology, and we've also seen kind of the commoditization of credentialism, which is traditional degrees and traditional ways of educating people to move into the labor force don't seem to be as effective right now. So I think everyone will pretty much agree with two statements. The first statement being that degrees are getting more expensive, and there's lots of data to back this up. This is fairly easy to prove. And the other being that they're also getting less valuable. So I don't have any hard quantitative data on this, but certainly there seems to be an intuitive sense in most people that if you graduated with a college degree 30 years ago or 20 years ago, that was certainly a better ticket into the labor market than it is today. So degrees are getting more expensive at the same time as they're getting less valuable. So why is this? Why are these traditional degrees not ensuring people having good jobs? Why are we at the end of jobs? And I think the popular kind of explanation for this is that we're in a global recession, that things are going rough, kind of this first few decades of a couple decades of the 20th century or 21st century, but things are going to turn around and everything will be fine as soon as we get out of this recession. And I think a much better explanation is that we are actually transitioning poorly between two distinct economic periods. So if you look back at the history of the West has moved through kind of three distinct periods, and I believe we're moving into the fourth. So it's moved from agricultural to industrial to information. And I think what is happening now is we are continuing to equip people for the information economy, and we as individuals are continuing to prepare ourselves to enter the information economy. And that is no longer the limit in the West. That what is needed is not more knowledge workers per se, though certainly knowledge is a component of entrepreneurship, but more entrepreneurial. A more entrepreneurial approach to work will instead serve us better as a society, and I think we'll also argue is going to serve us better as individuals. That taking a more entrepreneurial approach to your career is safer and more accessible and more profitable than kind of a traditional career path. So like, why is this, or how do we explain this kind of shift in the labor market? So this is the Cynefin framework. It was developed by a guy named Dave Snowden as a management framework, and I think explains really well kind of the changes that have happened in work over the past few hundred years. So if you think about work from an agricultural or an industrial standpoint, it kind of falls in this bottom right quadrant of simple best practice work. I think of putting together like an IKEA table, right? You can follow the steps A, B, C, D. You screw in the legs, and it's very clearly delineated how that work works. And that has become less valuable over time as we've moved into the knowledge economy and into what I think is more complicated work. So the transition that happened over the course of the 20th century in my mind was this simple to complicated transition for the most part, that the work that became valuable and the work that was more profitable to do was this complicated knowledge work, which is, you go to a degree and that gets you maybe 80% of the way there. You learn the basics of your field, these good practices, and then there's certainly a level of creativity in applying those to new situations that's required for complicated work. And what is happening now is this transition from complicated to complex, from good practices to emergent practices. So not even starting with that kind of 80% good practice base, but having to be in a situation where markets are changing very fast, job demands are changing very fast. What is needed is this entrepreneurial skill set around probing for new opportunities, sensing what those are, and responding. So this nature of work is shifting towards kind of the complex and in some cases even the chaotic side of this graph. So that is kind of the jobs piece, what's going on with jobs and work. And now I want to move into entrepreneurship and what I see as the opportunity there. And so the first is entrepreneurship safer than ever? And I think when people think of entrepreneurship, safe is definitely not the word that pops to mind. And I want to make the argument that, in fact, we're moving into a position where jobs are getting riskier, where what was once risky is now safe, and what was once safe is now risky. And I found a good way of talking about this is the turkey problem. So this is borrowed from Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. And he uses this graph to explain. You can see here is a turkey. He is, kind of the beginning of Q4. He's plotting out his quarterly earnings. And he doesn't see that Thanksgiving is coming, that his projections are based upon his life experience. So imagine you're a turkey, you're born, and every day you wake up, the butcher comes out, he puts the food in the trough, and your life experience is that every day the butcher comes out and puts the food in the trough. So, with increasing statistical confidence as the turkey, you can say that what's going to happen tomorrow is the butcher's going to come out, he's going to put the food in the trough, and I can continue walking around the turkey pen and eating my food, and everything is good. Of course, the day before Thanksgiving, the turkey's world is kind of shattered. So I think this is a really good corollary to use for the position a lot of people are in, where they are in jobs where the positions are not entrepreneurial. They're not entrepreneurial roles inside a company or inside a startup or small business, but they are very much in this position where they're kind of taking orders, and they think this, constant paycheck coming in is signal that they are providing value to the marketplace. But it is actually kind of this obscuring mechanism. So, if an entrepreneur is in a position where, the product isn't doing well, he's not providing value to the marketplace, the service isn't good, he doesn't get paid, or she doesn't get paid from her customers. There's this market feedback mechanism. Now, if you're in a position, I pick on accountants a bit in the book, but if you're in this position where your job could be moved overseas to a place where the cost basis is much lower, it could be converted into software, you don't get any feedback until the last minute, right? So you continue to get your paycheck the week before until you get that notice from HR, which basically says, look, your department is being, moved overseas, or, it's going to be radically downsized as we bring in this software. And now all of a sudden you're in a position where your skill set is more or less obsolete. It's no longer valuable. And also your professional network is built around this skill set, which again has been commoditized by software and globalization and outsourcing. So what seems like a very safe trajectory is in fact, I believe, much riskier because of these changes we're seeing going on in kind of the nature of work and what the market demands. So, let's say, you accept this premise that entrepreneurship is getting safer. Well, how do you get into entrepreneurship, or is entrepreneurship even accessible to most people? And I want to argue that it is more accessible than ever and getting even more accessible. So this graph here on the left is from Chris Anderson's The Long Tail book. He's a writer at Wired Magazine, and he noticed this trend, I think 10 or 12 years ago when he published the first article, that if you look at the way markets traditionally organize, you have a few big winners and not much else. So if you look at the movie market, there are like the 10 top movies in the box office, and they're going to make generally 80% of the money, and then all the rest of the thousands of movies that were released that week, independent small productions, are going to make very, very little. And what he saw happening was actually the internet was changing the distribution, that more and more of these little movies, which would be in the long tail, were actually viable, and that opportunities which weren't possible pre-internet were suddenly good business opportunities, or good movie opportunities in this case, post-internet. So, the same concept applies to every industry I've seen it in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications of that for entrepreneurs and kind of flesh out that framework. So there's three primary forces of the long tail. The first is the democratization of the tools of production. Going back, if you wanted to make a movie 50 years ago, you got to go rent a studio. You have to get all this expensive equipment. You have to raise a lot of capital. And what we've seen because of technology and the internet is that these tools of production have been democratized. So when we traditionally think of tools of production, we think of we think of a factory with infrastructure and lots of employees and workers, and this requires a lot of capital. This requires a lot of investment. And what the tools of production look a lot more like now is this, right? It looks like a laptop and an internet connection. That there are individuals whose sole means of production is their knowledge, their skill set, and access to the internet, via computer access to technology. So what used to be very expensive has gotten dramatically cheaper. Again, we're seeing these kind of huge efficiency gains over a relatively short time period. It's easier to make things. And I think I'll go back. This is also true of physical products. Like, I think it's fairly obvious to think about this in terms of like digital products or information products, or releasing something like this. But even the cost and ability to manufacture in China has gone down dramatically over the last 20 years. If you wanted to go source and manufacture a product in China 20 years ago, you need to fly over to China. You're not going to be able to find the factories directly. People were very deliberate about hiding who their suppliers were, or not sharing who their suppliers were. So you're going to have to go through all these middlemen, probably going to get jerked around a fair amount. It's going to be very expensive. Once you do finally find a factory that can manufacture a product you want, they were not doing a lot of short-run manufacturing, so you're going to have to make a big initial purchase order. So again, a long time to get this sourced and get this started, and then significant capital requirements. And now we have Alibaba, which is this directory which Chinese suppliers can basically list themselves on, and you can go skip through all these middlemen, skip the flight to China. You can source directly from Alibaba. You can find a factory making a product similar to the one you want, contact them directly and say, I want something that looks like this product but is different in ways A, B, and C. Instead of faxing them a pencil drawing or faxing them something you've drawn out yourself, all of a sudden you can send them a PDF file of a 3D rendering, again, that can be made using relatively inexpensive software on your computer. So again, even with physical products, the tools of production have very much democratized because of technology and developments in the developing world. So it's easier to make things great. Well, how do you get it in people's hands? So the second force of the long tail is this democratization of the tools of distribution. So as it's become easier to make things, it's also easier to get those things into people's hands. 20 years ago, you want to set up a new store, you got to go get this store on Main Street over here. You got to sign a lease, which is going to be tens of thousands of dollars for a couple of years, and then you got to buy an ad. So this is the Austin American-Statesman. It's the local newspaper here in Austin, Texas, and it has a circulation of 120 to 180,000 people. And you want to buy a front page ad or a large ad in here. It's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. This is a writer named James Clear. He writes about productivity and motivation and focus. He hosts his site not on Main Street, but on WordPress, which is a free content management software. And he has a readership of around 120,000 to 180,000 people. So again, you're looking at what takes 100 of people on staff to put out this newspaper to get to 120 to 180,000 people. James is roughly doing that by himself and using a free platform. So again, this access to markets, access to distribution, again, we're seeing these massive gains in efficiency. And then the third force is this creation of new markets or new market opportunities. So coming back to the movie example here, you look at this graph on the left, you can see the line the white line follows this dotted line up until around movie rank 100. And then what happens is if you're not in the top 100, maybe you get some regional distribution. So it drops off. And then if you're not in the top 500, you're not going to get into movie theaters. And it just hit zero. And this area labeled latent demand is this demand that has always existed, but the economics of retail simply hasn't allowed it. So if you look over here at the graph on the right, what should look like a long tail gets cut off around movie 100, right? Because if you can't get into the top movie theaters, you just can't get distribution. And now because of the internet, all of a sudden that kind of demand has been revealed. So, there's probably always been people that are interested in, Brazilian tree frog documentaries. But, the economics of retail of bringing that to a movie theater simply didn't allow it. So one of the people I interviewed for the book was Derek Sivers. He's the founder of CD Baby. They were a company that started about 15 years ago and let musicians distribute directly to customers, not having to go through music stores. And he told me the story of one of the most successful people on there was a woman who made songs for sailors. So you can imagine there was probably always some segment of the market that wanted songs for sailors, sea shanties. But of course, a record store in Columbus, Ohio cannot stock. They can't afford the shelf space for the sea shanties production, or they can't afford the shelf space because they're not going to move enough copies to justify it. However, if you're doing this online, where the marginal cost of adding another product page is basically zero, this is no problem. And this woman was actually making a very healthy full-time living, writing songs and singing songs about sailing and what it meant to be a sailor. So the final section of this entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship more profitable than ever? And first I want to talk about what does more profitable mean. So certainly one component of profit is financial, and we'll talk about that. But there is, I think, also more to what it means to be profitable in the sense of life and not just of business. This is an ad from a company called Escape the City. They're based primarily in the UK, I believe. But basically what they do is they take people in high-paying corporate jobs that are looking to escape the city and move them into positions where they have more freedom and autonomy in their work, and also more meaning and purpose in what they're working towards. The people are willing to sacrifice just financial for meaning and freedom. So I think when you look at theories of human motivation, and what it is most individuals want, that financial security, meaning and purpose in what they're doing, and freedom really encapsulates kind of what profit means or what wealth means in this broader context. And I also want to argue that the ability to live a profitable life in this sense is becoming more and more accessible. So if you look at where individuals fall along this spectrum of least free to most free, the capacity for freedom is increasing. So people that grew up in the industrial economy simply didn't have the options we had today. As the middle class and the upper middle class in the West has developed, they have a lot more freedom and autonomy in how they approach their work. The middle class is much more creative in their day-to-day work at their companies and their work, and also in designing their hobbies and choosing how they want to raise their families. That there's a much greater capacity for freedom, and I believe there is today again, a greater capacity for individuals who are willing to step into this entrepreneurial economy and into these entrepreneurial life scripts. And I actually had a conversation with my neighbor while I was writing the book, and was at the same time reading this Rockefeller of John D. Rockefeller. And my neighbor related to me, he was going to Europe for 2 weeks, and it kind of had this aha moment where John D. Rockefeller, who was one of the wealthiest people of his generation 100 years ago, was able to leave the country once. He had to get on a boat. He had to go over to Europe. He had to organize, his business so it could work while he was away. This was a real affair to be able to do this, that most people in his day didn't even leave their home state. And that level of autonomy to be able, once in your life to leave the country is now available to broad sections of the middle class in the West. And again, I think that this natural extension of freedom is something that is continuing, and we can kind of step into this new level of freedom and autonomy that didn't exist, even 20 years ago. So, kind of accepting that broader definition of wealth, we'll come back and look at the financial component of entrepreneurship and why that I think that's, in many cases, in most people's cases, a more intelligent financial choice. So if you go to a financial advisor, they will almost certainly show you a graph or a chart that looks something like this, where they show the power of compound interest, right? So if you start saving early, and you let that interest compound over a career, over a lifetime, it can add up to some pretty substantial numbers. And a point that I borrowed from MJ DeMarco in the Millionaire Fast Lane, which is where I stole this graph, is, what if we could just skip to age 50? What if we could skip 30 years and start letting the compound interest work there? That's where things really get interesting. So how do we do that? How do we accelerate the path to having a kind of a sizable financial asset, which again, it can be invested in passive investments to let compound naturally? And the answer is controllable, unlimited variables. So if you look at people in most traditional jobs, they do not control the variables, and those variables are capped. So I've heard this story a number of times. I suspect many of you have as well. Someone goes into a position, they're very intelligent, they're very hardworking, they have their 1 year review, and they basically get told, look, you're doing a great job, and we're very happy with you, but we can't move you up because it's going to be bad for corporate morale. We have this rule where you can't move up in the company until you've been here for 2 years. So even though you're creating more value, you're doing more for the company than other people at your position, we can't move you up. It's capped. So again, these variables are not under their control, and they also have limited upside because they can't move up the corporation as fast as they would like to, and even so, their time is always linked to money. Their time is always linked to their salary. The only way they can earn more is generally to work harder, to work longer hours. If you compare this to someone in an entrepreneurial situation, whether that's running a business or working in an entrepreneurial role in another business, where they have kind of some some piece of the pie, some link to the upside. They have controllable unlimited variables. So first of all, they kind of have their hands on the machine, right? Like this is the traffic conversion economics triangle, which I borrowed from Perry Marshall's 80/20 sales and marketing book, that if you look at a business, there are three primary ways you can increase it. You can increase the traffic, you can increase the conversions, or you can improve the economics. So if you have 5,000 people that are coming to your website and you double that, you can double the revenue to the business. If 2% of those people are converting into customers and you double that, you can again double the revenue of the business. If you've been in the market for 3 to 5 years and you see a new opportunity to come out with like a new innovative product that you can charge higher margins for, you can improve the fundamental economics of the business. And all three of these can happen at the same time, and they all feed into another one. So if you can increase the traffic while increasing the conversions, while improving the economics, you can see very, very fast rates of growth. So one of the companies I worked on, we were able to do this, and the company grew a little over 500% in a 2-year period. So imagine someone getting a 500% raise in 24 months. That's not something you ever heard of, again, because of this controllable unlimited variables. The other aspect I think is helpful in thinking about entrepreneurship from a financial perspective is this notion of expected value. So this is the EV graph, and we think one thing I noticed that's interesting is a lot of entrepreneurs I met had backgrounds in poker, and I think this is because poker teaches you to understand very well this concept of expected value. If you're a poker player and you're in a situation where you think there's a 20% chance you're going to win the prize, win the pot, and the pot is $20,000, that has an expected value of $4,000. So you're only going to win it 1 out of 5 times. But if you can make that bet over and over and over, you would continue to make it. Made 100 times where the averages come out. If you could pay $1,000 to see the final card to get to the pot, and your expected value is $4,000, it makes a lot of sense to do that. But we don't tend to carry this over, or we don't understand this concept and apply it very well, in my experience, to our careers and to our lives in general. We label things as, this is safe or this is risky, and we don't think about the expected value. So what might seem like a risky move, if the expected value is good, done systematically over a career, could in the long run be more profitable. So if you're in a position where you're not sure if the business you're in is going to succeed or going to start a new business will succeed, what's happened is that the cost to try out that opportunity has gone way down for like these factors we've talked about with the long tail, and also kind of the potential access to new markets, to global markets, has gone up. So I think the expected value for entrepreneurs is increasing. And the other thing that I don't talk about in the book, but I think is kind of a strong buttress to this point is expected value goes up over time. So as individuals develop more entrepreneurial skill sets, a lot of entrepreneurs have many failed businesses in their background, but as they build that skill set, they build those relationships around becoming more entrepreneurial, the expected value again increases. They understand the markets better, they understand how to build a business or work on growing a business more effectively. And the other thing I want to come back to this freedom point is that I think freedom is also, having freedom and autonomy in work is also something that's more profitable. So there's a guy named Edward Deci. He is the founder of self-determination theory, and he's done a lot of studies where what he discovered was people who had autonomy in their work actually were better at that work. So he did a study in a call center where people were asked to read a script beforehand, and the group that was most successful was the group that before they went into kind of the call center to do the sales calls was asked to read a paragraph around why they were doing this, what the purpose of the company was, and why this was meaningful. And they closed more sales. The company was more effective. And so if you imagine someone had taken Steve Jobs and he said, Steve, you have to, I'm kind of ordering you, I'm telling you, you have to design a better phone. With that sense of obligation, I think he might have looked at the BlackBerry and said, we can rearrange the keys, and just made that a slightly better product. And of course, instead what he did was he developed the iPhone, which kind of revolutionized the industry. And I think that can be very much explained, that a lot of these big innovations can be explained by people who had a sense of freedom and autonomy in their work. So not only is it kind of innately enjoyable on a day-to-day basis, which I think we all agree with, but also I think more profitable in the long run. And then this other piece of profitability is meaning. So I think it's pretty easy to convince people that they want meaning and purpose in their work. But I think a lot of people are stuck in this dilemma, and I think sometimes a very real dilemma of having to give up meaning, or having to give up money and financial incentives to find something that is more meaningful, though. And I think in a lot of ways, entrepreneurship offers kind of sort of a best of both worlds career path, that working on something which you are excited about and which you find meaningful can be also more profitable. So these two guys are both venture capitalists. The guy on the left is Marc Andreessen. The guy on the right is Peter Thiel. And I've heard both of them tell stories where they're looking at what are the characteristics of successful founders. So they've talked with thousands of entrepreneurs and have done a lot of pattern matching around what are the factors which make entrepreneurs successful. And one conclusion they've both reached is kind of this deep sense of meaning in their particular business and the work they're doing. So Marc Andreessen has a story where he talks about founders coming in to ask for funding, and very quickly in the interview he will push back on them and say, well, why don't you go pursue this other opportunity? You should kind of pivot your company and pursue this different problem. And a lot of people will turn into yes men. They're in his office, obviously they want to get access to millions and millions of dollars, and they'll say, yeah, it's a much better idea. We'll pivot and work on that. And what he's noticed is the most successful founders are the ones that do the opposite. They tend to get pissed off and angry, and sometimes will storm out of the room and say, look, I spent years of my life working on this problem. This is the best possible approach to solving this problem right now. And if you don't want to help me, fine, I don't care. I'll get someone else, and I'll make this happen, because this is the problem I want to spend, the next 5, 10, 20 years of my life working on. And those are the individuals that actually end up building more profitable companies. And Peter Thiel has a similar story about Mark Zuckerberg. He was one of the early investors in Facebook, and Facebook had an offer from Google for, I think, $250 million. And this was relatively early on in Facebook's days. And he went into this meeting with Mark and was inclined, thought, we should probably sell this. $250 million is a really amazing offer. And Mark Zuckerberg walks in and says, this is a perfunctory meeting. Obviously, we're not going to sell the company. I just, wanted to clarify that so I can get back to work. And Thiel, of course, says, well, maybe we should take $250 million. This is a big buyout. And Zuckerberg basically said, look, I want to spend my life working on social networks. I think this is kind of the future, and this is what I'm excited about working on. And I already have one right now. I'd rather not sell it and have to go start another one. And so, of course, they didn't sell to Google, and Facebook is now worth billions and billions of dollars as it has continued to grow. So, I think there's certainly, meaning and freedom as profitable in and of themselves, but I think also a very good argument to be made that creating work or having work where there's meaning and freedom is also more financially profitable in many cases in the long run. So this is a graph I actually just put together yesterday, kind of graphing out a summation of all these concepts, which is career risk. So this job on the left is, I think, kind of the career risk profile for jobs as I talk about them in the book. So this does not necessarily mean any position working for a company is a job as I use the term. Job as I use the term is someone that is in a system where they are being told what to do. They are not creating and innovating but are instead operating kind of pulling the levers of someone else's machine. I think entrepreneurial roles tend to be much more one where you are designing the machine, you are saying where the levers go, and not just pulling on kind of these existing levers or mechanisms. So I think those people are, if you look at these lines coming off the bottom, like this is the turkey problem. These are the risky things they don't see. And again, like the upside here is capped. So you have this concave graph of that career risk profile. And on the right, we have, I think, what is a more entrepreneurial career risk profile, which is, upside is larger, both in terms of financial profit and kind of meaning and freedom and these other aspects of what it means to be profitable or what wealth really means. And that the downside has come way, way down. That because of the long tail, like the capital requirements, the barriers to entry have come way, way down. So, of course, there are people who kind of fall at the top of this job graph on the left, and there are people who fall at the bottom of this entrepreneurial graph on the right. That are certainly exceptions to what I'm talking about here. But I think the risk profile for a more entrepreneurial career is much, much better, and I think getting better. I think these graphs will only continue to be more true over the next 10 or 20 years. So if you accept this premise, what are the paths into entrepreneurship? How do you become more entrepreneurial? So I think the first point to be made is that, just like you can acquire more knowledge, you can go to university, you can get a degree, you can take courses. Entrepreneurship is very much something that can be acquired. That someone launching their third company has a much higher probability of success than someone launching their first company, or someone in their third tour of duty with an entrepreneurial company is going to be better than someone in their first. That this is a skill set can be acquired. So how do you acquire it? The two methods I see emerging are one, the stair-step approach. This is from Rob Walling, who is, he has a podcast called Startups for the Rest of Us, where he talks about startups for software businesses, for primarily bootstrapped software businesses. And what he saw emerging in his community, and also looking back at his own path, was this way to stair-step into bigger and bigger markets. So he started with, I think his first product was a duck boat ebook. So this was an ebook on how you can build a duck boat, I think for duck hunting. So this is a market that only exists on the internet, right? You can't stock duck boat ebooks in traditional bookstores. There's just not enough market demand. So he was able to come into this market where it only exists on the internet. Competition was relatively low, and he was able to start making some money and building this entrepreneurial skill set. So in his case, he learned SEO. And then he started acquiring or starting other businesses that were this kind of same model of one-time sale through a single channel, in his case SEO, and then was able to stair-step that up to kind of get the cash flow to move him into a position where he could launch bigger businesses, and also where he had the skill set and relationships to launch bigger businesses. WordPress plugins, I think, are one of these opportunities right now. People launching WordPress plugins can make a few $1,000s a month with each of these plugins, and get to a position where they can either leave their full-time job if they don't feel like it's an entrepreneurial position with future potential, or leave their consulting if it's in the same position and move into working full-time on their business. Amazon, YouTube, these are all kind of other channels. So step 2 is repeating that same process until you own your time, and then step 3, moving into a bigger business. So he's gone from, duck boats, and I think job board for electricians was one of his other businesses, to now running kind of these complex software projects, SaaS products like Drip email marketing, and also HitTail, which is an SEO tool. So he stair-stepped his way, and this is possible for these reasons we talked about in terms of, accessibility. That there's the ability to make these products is getting easier and easier. It's getting easier to distribute them, and there's also all these new markets that didn't previously exist. So I think that's kind of an overall good framework of getting out of this framework of am I an entrepreneur, or how do I become an entrepreneur? Thinking like, how do I invest in entrepreneurship? The other path that I see emerging is this one of apprenticeships, which is going to work in an entrepreneurial company, there's a fast-growing small business or a startup, and developing the skill sets around entrepreneurship. And so I think apprenticeships have been this like tried and true method of getting into a career for pretty much all of human, certainly post-Neolithic human history, really until the 20th century. And I think it offers some distinct advantages over university or kind of traditional career paths in that it is better training in this complex environment. So going back to the Cynefin framework, how do you learn to operate in a complex environment where things are changing and shifting very fast? I think a really effective way to do that is to just get into a position where that's what's going on, where you're in kind of this apprenticeship role. It's also a great way to build relationships. Working in an entrepreneurial business, you're going to be hanging out with other people that are doing entrepreneurial things. So building this skill set and this relationship. And I also think this is a really good opportunity for companies right now to hire entrepreneurial individuals or aspiring entrepreneurial individuals to bring them in and say, look, we're going to put you in a position where you have a lot of control, you have a lot of autonomy, and we expect results and we expect growth. To take people that they're not having to kind of lay out what's going on, but to hire people who have this or trying to develop this entrepreneurial mindset and kind of cut a deal with them when they say, look, you could probably make more in a traditional corporate job, but this is a better trajectory opportunity for you. We're going to come in and we're going to let you train at altitude, have access to all our resources, and learn what it looks like to grow a business. And then, if you want to move up in the company, we will let you move up as quickly as you possibly can. We want you to be able to accelerate that, like as the company grows, or as you grow the company, we're going to move you up. And then if someday you decide you want to go start your own business, that's something we'll support you with, knowing that it's going to be good for us in the long run to develop this alumni network of entrepreneurs. And so that's the presentation. Again, my name is Taylor Pearson. The book is The End of Jobs. If you have any questions, thoughts, do email me, tweet me. I'm at Taylor Pearson, me.